Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel today. This is Paul at Kentucky Tacklebox. Today I want to talk about Ned rig fishing and maybe an alternative way or two that you can rig the Ned rig. So let's start with a traditional Ned rig. Normally you use this style of hook, which is designed, it's like a Ned head style hook. It has a small wire keeper on it, and then it's got a round bend hook, and it's just designed to be hooked to the Ned rig lure like this. Typically, you just slide it over and then you just float it, tug it along, kind of simulate like a minnow or something. But the thing about these lures is they also tend to float. So I have a little tank of water here I brought for demonstration purposes. And you can see as you can tug it along, it'll straighten out. But then as it stops, the tail starts to rise and float up. And that's typically how these are fished. Uh, just kind of tugging them along and letting the tail float up and just kind of making it look like a worm or something small feeding at the bottom of the water column. So another video I happened to see today from another YouTuber, they were actually using a craw and they were doing what they called like a Nico rig style. So what they did was they took one of these Ned rigs here and just after where the little metal keeper is right there, they actually cut the hook off right here. And they used this like a weight, like a nail weight in the bottom of the lure. And so I kind of rigged one up to kind of show you what it looks like. So if you cut the hook off the back and you just leave the wire keeper, you can insert this easily into the Ned rig. And then it'll stay because that little wire keeper helps to hold it. And then you can use any type of hook you like, whether it be a smaller hook or a larger diameter hook. And then you have a couple of options of how you can rig it. I have this one rigged in this particular configuration, but you could rig them a couple different ways. And what's a little different about it is, I'll put it in the tank here, it also floats up as long as you don't have the hook too far near the end of it. And but the hook's in a different orientation. So in this case, the hook is actually pointing up, whereas the traditional Ned rig, when it floats up, the hook is pointing down. So having a different setup with your hooks may allow you to get a little better bite hookup because, as you can see, depending on how the fish attacks the lure, if it's coming in from the side, you may have a better hookup ratio if it's hooked where the hook's coming out the top versus the traditional Ned rig where the hook's actually pointing towards the bottom of the water column. So, and that's, like I say, just a couple of options that you could do. Now, the other option is with these type of hooks, you can hook them a couple different ways. You could actually go right into the tail of it and bring it out, which would be another way you could hook it. And that would give it a different action again as well. And then the hook is pointing up. And as long as the hook's not too heavy, the lure should still remain buoyant. Okay, and then there's a pretty drastic difference between the two, where the one's pointing down and the other is pointing up. I can get this spun around a little bit. Just have to use my fingers here. So, but yeah, you can see how one's pointing up and one's pointing down that way. That would be another option as far as rigging it. Although if you run the hook at the end, the lure is not going to tend to float up as much because that hook's going to offset the buoyancy of the lure itself. And another option yet would be to run this same hook in this configuration, but lower down in the lure. So you could actually take it and move the hook instead of at the end, maybe middle of the lure or so down. And then depending on whether you want it on the same side as the eyelet of the thing or not, you could rig it in such a way like this as well. And then kind of run it through so that the eye of the hook is kind of hidden in the lure body. And then what you end up is something kind of like that. Okay. And then that also would allow it to stand better. And you can kind of see looking at the two of them, one is the hook is pointed up, one the hook is pointed down. So it gives you a couple of options, and depending on how the fish are attacking your lure, that may give you a way to maybe catch into some fish a little better one way or the other. So just a couple things to think about next time you're fishing Ned rig lures, and ideally cutting the Ned rig, these are fairly expensive jig heads. So if you can find a hook that's got a thin wire keeper that's not necessarily a Ned head style, you'd probably be money ahead because these usually are like $3 or $4 or $5 for a pack, and you get 4 or 5 of them. So you don't want to be cutting up a lot of these if you don't have to. But if you can find a hook that's got a thin wire keeper, and you can just snip the end of the hook off and retain the wire keeper, that'll give you your thin nail weight. Or if you can find a thin nail weight that will go into this plastic of these Ned bodies easier, then you would be better off, because these are fairly hard to insert a thicker hook or a thicker like a nail weight into, because of just the way the material is very elasticy, and it kind of fights you when you're trying to put a traditional nail weight in it. But anyway, something to think about if you like Ned rig fishing and you're just looking for maybe a new way to play around with it, maybe come up with a different idea as how you'd like to rig it and fish it. But and that's half the fun of fishing. Like I say, just playing around with some different ideas as to how to make the lures work the way you want them to. And each one has its advantages and disadvantages. And a lot of it is going to come down to how the fish are biting on a given day, as to which one is going to work the best for you. But keep being creative with your lures, and you'll find it's a lot more fun to fish that way. And if you find something that really helps catch you more fish on that given day, then it's well worth the idea to kind of just try it a little bit. So, anyways, as always, thanks for watching the channel, and get outdoors when you can. It's a great place to be. We'll see you next time.